Hello, Starshine. My name is Liz, and this is my channel, Simsational Stories. If you have not seen my videos before, and you enjoy this one, please like and subscribe, and maybe check out my other social media as well. I'm on both Facebook and Twitter. All relevant links are in the description below, and of course, if you're a Sims player and you'd like to download any of my characters, just search the hashtag Simsational Stories on the Sims 4 gallery. All original content is created by This Is Not Eric. Finally, before I begin my Simsational story, I'd like to issue this blanket content and trigger warning. The following story is just Sims, hey. I'm not going to apologise for treating them terribly, if that's what I've done. But I do want to assure you now that although I mean absolutely no harm, I completely understand if you feel unable to consume my content. Many loves, and we will catch each other on the internet elsewhere. Okay, so now we've gotten that over with. Let's go. Today's story is from the Fundamentalist Ferguson Family, and we're at Chapter 8. If you have not seen previous chapters and would like to catch up, there are playlists available on my channel so you can hear the entire story in chronological order. The rest of us are going to move on from where we left off last time though. So without further ado, Cameron Ferguson, his wife Addison, twins Elijah and Esther, toddler Edward, and baby Edith live in suburban Willow Creek. Each Sunday they have an official holiday, which consists of a community service ceremony, remembrance of the dead, having a consciously thankful spirit, the setting of resolutions for the week to come, and a grand meal which they ate together as a family. On top of all that, the Fergusons also concluded Sunday evenings with their own private family ceremony. Cameron would preach a little, and then they would all in turn confess their sins of the week to him, which he would, of course, kindly absolve them of. Cameron worked at the local hospital as a doctor, and had in fact become rather successful in recent years. There was even talk of him becoming chief of staff in the future. He was an acclaimed diagnostician and successful surgeon, as well as being blessed with a gentle bedside manner his patients raved about. Meanwhile, Addison stayed home to care for their growing brood of beautiful children. She also homeschooled their daughter Esther and kept a thriving veggie garden, dairy cow, and various chickens alive besides that. She was busy, but happy. Like her mother and grandmother before her, Addison had been raised to be the person she was now, a devoted, devout, demure wife and mother. From her perspective, at least, she was living both her dream and her divine destiny. Addison loved her life. She had obviously been blessed with a fertile womb, still not yet 30, and she was already pregnant with her 5th child. Her babies were just the most amazing, kind, smart, wonderful little people you could ever imagine meeting. That she and Cameron could have created such sweet souls was a miracle to her, and she was utterly determined to raise them right. Being raised right, to the Fergusons at least, meant that Cameron and Addison's children were indoctrinated into their parents' religion. Like their parents and grandparents before them, they were being raised into a life of traditional values and were subjected to strong religious rhetoric from their earliest days. Cameron was the head of the family, with Addison as his helpmate, and their children were expected to dutifully obey them. Eldest daughter Esther had to help her mother around the house and help take care of her younger siblings. It was not a role she took to naturally, but rather one which she had to, in her mother's words, work to be peaceful in. For something deep in Esther's spirit always just rebelled at seemingly everything. The only thing she did like about it all was playing with her baby brother and sister. Esther just loved her little siblings. She was obsessed with watching them grow
and learn and start to become little people. She had once played with Edward like she now played with Esther, and soon the process would continue with a new baby. It was amazing. She couldn't wait to have her own baby someday. It was the one part of her future that she looked forward to. Getting married to some guy her dad picked out sounded pretty horrible, but you obviously had to get married to have babies, and Esther definitely knew that she wanted to be a mum someday. Esther's twin brother Elijah wasn't so sure that he wanted to be a dad, but he never said as much to anyone. Elijah was a very quiet, reserved kind of a child, and he felt like he knew better than to argue with his parents like Esther often did. He probably would get married someday and have to become a father too, but it would only be to please those around him, not himself. He didn't really know what he wanted anyway. Maybe that was why it was easier for him to be at peace with letting their parents decide. Elijah did love Edward, his little brother, and Esther was getting cuter by the day. But just in general, he found that he didn't really care that much for other people. Certainly not girls. He didn't care much for other boys either, though. As he grew up, it became apparent that Elijah was more of a loner than anything else. Even the times he spent with his siblings were always quiet times, reading books or chatting over a game of chess. Elijah also harbored a rather dark secret. Also he thought, anyway, in that he didn't really believe in any of the religious things his parents did. Oh, he had when he was little. However, as he had gotten older, Elijah had begun to quietly question some things. He had gone online at school, done some research, and realized rather a lot of things. But he never told his parents or his siblings any of this. Sometimes Cameron would look at his eldest son and wonder what was going on in that dark-haired, bright-eyed head of his. Elijah was so quiet, so reserved, and yet dutiful and polite enough always too. He stood out amongst his siblings, and yet fitted into the background rather perfectly too, especially when compared with Edward. They all knew that Edward was his father's favourite. The boisterous little boy was only 4 years old and was already quite a character, with seemingly endless energy and calm confidence beyond his years. Cameron loved playing with Edward and showed him a level of attention that the others never got. They would even play together, something Cameron had never done with his children before Edward. Cameron was a good father, an involved father. However, at the end of the day, he truly believed that the household upkeep and childcare were part of his wife's domain, which he respected by withholding interference. He was happy to be there as additional support when needed, and he obviously provided the underlying discipline of the family dynamics. However, apart from his closeness with Edward, his children often found Cameron to be rather standoffish. Being fundamentalist Sims, it was, in general, rather hard for the Fergusons to make friends outside of the church, and there were very few members of their faith out here in Willow Creek. Cameron was lucky enough to have found a friend at work, though, and he often went over to the Longley household for lunch. Samuel's wife Cecilia was a little droopy at times, but she was still a wonderful cook. They had a daughter named Priscilla, who was almost the same age as Edith. A little older, maybe. Sadly, though she was always known for being rather morose, nobody, from husband Samuel to friend Cameron, realised just quite how depressed Cecilia was, until it was far, far too late. What had happened was an awful, unspeakable event, one that shocked the whole community at large, and especially the church they were all a part of. Samuel was naturally left bereft by the death of his beautiful young wife, and at a loss as to how to care for their young daughter without her. Poor little Priscilla had been with her mother when it had happened. Samuel still didn't know how or why his wife could have done that to their infant daughter. But she had. The tiny toddler girl child would probably be scarred for life by what she had gone through. And how was he to fix that? He just didn't know how. He hired a butler. What he really needed, Cameron told him firmly over lunch at work one day, was a new wife. His young daughter Priscilla deserved and needed the care of a woman to grow up properly in a family setting, and the sooner Samuel could find the strength within himself to move on with his life, the better, for that was what he needed to do. God and Cecilia would both want him to do that. Cameron had a grieving, widowed Samuel over to dinner with his own family to try to convince the man, by example, of what a wonderful gift from God it was to be blessed with a brood of beautiful babies. Samuel was definitely impressed and delighted to be invited over. His own father had strongly impressed upon him the importance of befriending the Ferguson family, who were considered quite important in the church. However, there was no way that he could handle the thought of remarriage just yet. Samuel had only just lost Cecilia, and he had hired a butler to take care of Priscilla for now. His daughter was still small. While he agreed with Cameron that she did need a mother, he himself was not yet ready to be a father to his daughter again, let alone a husband to someone else. He barely had it in him to look in on his child once a day after work, usually while she slept, and a new wife would require an energy and spirit he knew he had not yet regained. This was when Cameron had the idea that would change everything for everyone. He and Samuel had already talked together rather seriously about joining their families in the near-distant future by possibly having Elijah and Priscilla maybe marry someday. But what if they doubled down on that connection and had Samuel himself marry Esther? Not immediately, of course. She was still far too young for that. But in a few more years, when she was old enough? Samuel was young himself yet. They had but a decade between them. It wasn't that crazy an idea, at least not to the adults involved anyway. Cameron explained the whole situation to his eldest daughter himself. Younger girls marrying slightly older men was actually quite common within the church, especially in the case of somewhat difficult debutantes, such as Esther had already proved herself to be. It helped to avoid later issues, for as she grew up, there would be someone far more experienced in things to help see her through. And Cameron had known many ladies who, later in life, had in fact thanked their parents rather profusely for having been guided towards the right path and man. Samuel liked Esther well enough. Certainly she had been raised by an upstanding member of the church, and so he had no doubts that she would suit him as a future spouse. The Fergusons were a little more lax than he himself was with some things, but it was clear that Esther, being homeschooled, was already an accomplished housekeeper, and, thanks to her parents' prolific nature, she was fairly experienced in childcare, as well as more likely to be fertile herself. The deal was struck then. Samuel Longley and Esther Ferguson would one day wed, once Esther was old enough, and of course later Samuel's daughter Priscilla would also probably marry Elijah, after college of course. The two fundamentalist men, Cameron and Samuel, had become great friends over the past year and couldn't wait to truly be able to call one another family someday. Cameron and Addison's daughter Esther was not so excited about the news that she was now somehow betrothed to a 22-year-old man at just 13 years old herself. How had this happened? One moment, they were meeting father's friend from work, and the next, her hand in marriage was being offered over a lamb chop without her even fully realizing what was happening, let alone being asked what she thought about it all. She had always known that her parents would arrange her marriage, but she hadn't expected it to all be happening so soon. And that brings us to the end of Chapter 8 of The Fundamentalist Ferguson Family. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can tune in soon to hear the next chapter. And hey, maybe think about sharing my channel with a friend. Or don't. It's your life. Anyway, bye.